Welcome to this episode of Trojan Poetry, episode 55.
Wow.
Yeah.
We're getting there.
We're getting there. All right, this episode, I've picked the poem, Mike hasn't seen it, but I wanted to point out that we are going to talk about the poet's book, so stick around for that. It is Why Poetry by Matthew Zapruder. So we're going to look at one of his poems, and then we're going to very briefly talk about his book, which Mike hasn't read, so that'll be a good talks.
Right. He's going to school me here.
All right, so Mike is going to read the poem, which he's never read, a cold reading.
Here we go. All right, so this is called Schwinn by Matthew Zapruder. I hate the phrase inner life. My attic hurts, and I'd like to quit the committee for naming tornadoes. Do you remember how easy and sad it was to be young and defined by our bicycles? My first was Jell-O, and though it was no black phantom or stingray, but merely a Varsity, I loved the afternoon it was suddenly gone, chasing its apian flash through the neighborhoods with my father in vain. Like being a nuclear family in a television show, totally unaffected by a distant war. Then we returned to the green living room to watch the no-names hold our over-the-hill gang under the monotinted chromatic defeated Super Bowl waters. 1973, year of the black fly caught in my Jell-O. Year of the Suffrage building on K Street Northwest, where a few minor law firms mingle proudly with the union of butchers and meat cutters. A black hand already visits my father in sleep, moving up his spine to touch his amygdala. I will never know a single thing anyone feels, just how they say it, which is why I am standing here exactly, covered in shame and lightning, doing what I'm supposed to do.
You did a really nice job reading that.
You
did a very nice job reading that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think you're joking, but that's
No,
good.
no,
Yeah.
you did a very nice
I
job.
almost got thrown off by amygdala. I almost said amygdala, and then I caught myself. Good old amygdala. That's my favorite part of the brain, actually.
Yeah, so a cold reading.
Okay, obviously. Sorry.
I've only read it like
I'm a little
twice.
off track here. All right.
Yeah.
I hate the phrase inner life. My attic hurts. Just right there off the bat, I'm like, it was. Obviously, he's someone who does. It's ironic because he doesn't like reflection. He says that right from the beginning, and yet the whole poem is reflecting on his childhood, right?
Yeah.
And I just thought that was a really cool phrase. My attic hurts.
Yeah.
You know, it's like I picture the attic being the top of his head or his brain or something, and something is really bothering him. I'd like to quit the committee for naming tornadoes. I don't know what that means, but
You don't?
It sounds pretty dangerous. But that does tie into the end in terms of he keeps talking about disasters, right? A distant war he mentions in the middle. And then he talks about a black hand visiting his father in his sleep. And then the end, covered in shame and lightning. That's an awesome image. It's almost like a superhero, you know, covered in shame and lightning. And so he just keeps mentioning these disasters throughout, which is kind of what I stuck with. Obviously, I have to read this again, but what's your take on it?
Well, maybe we should read it again.
Okay.
We've never done it.
Should we do a reread?
What do you think?
Should we do a reread?
All right, I'll read it this time so you can hear it without having
Okay.
to do that. All right. I hate the phrase inner life. My attic hurts, and I'd like to quit the committee for naming tornadoes. Do you remember how easy and sad it was to be young and defined by our bicycles? My first was Jell-O, and though it was no black phantom or stingray, but merely a Varsity, I loved the afternoon it was suddenly gone, chasing its apian flash through the neighborhoods with my father in vain. Like being a nuclear family in a television show, totally unaffected by a distant war. Then we returned to the green living room to watch the no-names hold our over-the-hill gang under the monotinted chromatic,
one, right?
Yeah, monotinted chromatic defeated Super Bowl waters. 1973, the year of the black fly caught in my Jell-O. Year of the Suffrage building on K Street Northwest, where a few minor law firms mingle proudly with the union of butchers and meat cutters. A black hand already visits my father in sleep, moving up his spine to touch his amygdala. I will never know a single thing anyone feels, just how they say it, which is why I am standing here exactly, covered in shame and lightning, doing what I'm supposed to do.
You know what? I'm glad that we did that because 5 lines up from the bottom, I will never know a single thing anyone feels, just how they say it. So there's that disconnect there, right? That he's unable to form relationships or get close. And that goes back to his attic hurting. The one part in the middle, too, where he talks about I love the afternoon my bike was suddenly gone, chasing its apian flash through the neighborhoods with my father in vain. So did his bike get stolen? And that was the end of defining himself as by his bike. And then he had to, but it says my first was Jell-O, merely a Varsity. Maybe he loved the afternoon it was gone because then he could get a better bike.
Oh.
His bike got stolen, and and then he was able to move up the ladder. So that really stood out to me, that I will never know a single thing anyone feels, just how they say it. I think that to me would be, that's theme right there, or author's purpose. I don't know what.
Well,
did you notice anything else after the second time?
I picked the poem originally because I had been reading the book, Why Poetry. So I said, okay, I should read some of his poetry. And I saw the name Schwinn. I'm like, okay, but it's about bicycles. I did a little bit of predicting. And sure enough, I was like, okay, the first half of this poem feels like it's talking about my childhood. And I'm like, okay, I totally loved growing up, and we rode our bikes everywhere. Like we were on our bikes 8 hours a day. We just rode all over the place, and I didn't have a very good bike, but I had really nice wheels. I had the mag wheels, like with the 5 spokes, or
nice.
whatever.
Yeah.
And my bike got stolen when I got a bike for my birthday when I was like 11.
Was it a
and
BMX?
the next day it got stolen.
What?
It got stolen the day after my birthday. It was chained up to our basketball pole, and it got stolen. So I was like, oh my God, this guy's writing a poem about my life, right? And then it took that weird turn in the second half where we get to, okay, so I love the afternoon, it's suddenly gone. Like either, like you just said, I hadn't thought of that he's excited that now he's going to get a better bike, or somehow just the excitement of now they're on, like, it got stolen and now they're on a quest, right? That adventure, right? And then he's with his dad, and then we know the dad later. I think the reference here is that the dad is sick, right? That he has maybe brain cancer or something, right? Yeah. And so he's remembering how great it was to be with his dad on this adventure to save his bike, even though it wasn't the best bike, and how easy it was to just care about your bike. And that's true, right? Like that was pretty fun back in the day when all you cared about was your bike.
Yeah, I had a black BMX hand-me-down from my uncle. That was awesome.
Yeah.
And it had the plastic mag wheel, spokes on it and everything. That thing was indestructible. I'm sad. They don't make them like that anymore.
And then, and then I kind of got bogged down with this stuff that seems to be about politics with the Over the Hill gang, and I'm assuming maybe something about Watergate.
Yeah, I didn't quite get all the references there. Yeah. Obviously, 73 is before my time.
But I love the 73, the year of the black fly caught in my Jell-O. Like, the one thing that
that's the only thing you remember
is, because that would be really gross.
Yeah, that's a bummer. It ruins your day.
Right, you're eating your Jell-O, which was a big deal back in the day.
Yeah.
And then there's a nasty fly stuck in there. But then we got the Suffrage building and the unions and the father being ill. And then it got to I will never know a single thing anyone feels, which is what brought me then back to this book. So in the book, he goes on for a while about how language is very tenuous and language is very obviously ambiguous, and words can never quite make you connect fully, right? You can never actually really know how somebody feels. You have to use words, but words are imperfect. So he's like ruminating on being a poet here, right? But I'm doing what I can do, like.
Right, just how they say it, which is the act of recording it or listening to it and trying to write and trying to recreate it in his work.
Right,
possibly.
But it is that sense of disconnection where he never really can be 100% bonded. But the closest thing you can do maybe is try to use words, which is why he keeps trying to do it, right? Which is
doing what I'm supposed to do. Despite all of this, I feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to do.
Right, so maybe when he says, I'd like to quit the committee for naming tornadoes, maybe he's like, I'd like to quit being a poet. Like the tornadoes are the inner storms. And he wants to okay, I'm done, I can't do this. But then at the end he's like, well, covered in shame and lightning. That would, like you said, ties lightning back up to tornadoes, and the shame would tie back up maybe to the inner life.
My attic hurts.
And this is it, right? But somehow it goes from the bike to the being a poet.
That inner childhood, the nostalgia that he feels obviously throughout.
The easier.
Yeah, everything was easier, and he doesn't get to his father being sick until towards the end. You know, so that seems to be the turn when suddenly he comes to present time as himself as an adult.
So then the other part of this book is that it's very interesting. I've been enjoying it. I'm almost through with it. That he likes to talk about the idea that poetry is a machine, and that the poet creates basically a machine that your mind runs through that will in some way simulate the poet's mind, right? So it's that idea that you're going to connect to the poet by thinking like the poet, and that thinking is associative. So when I read this, I was like, oh, okay, he starts out with a bike, and then that makes him associate to this, and that makes him associate to that. So it is this kind of loose, like the poem echoes the form that he's talking about in the book.
Okay, that stream of consciousness almost.
Yeah, and that's the goal. A poem is meant to make your mind make those connections, because then you're thinking like the poet. And part of your job, I guess, as the reader, is to kind of let yourself go and try to make those connections so that you're thinking like the poet.
So the poem itself is a glimpse into the poet's mind and how it operates.
Yes.
Or it's like a mirror for
Right.
the poet's mind.
Right.
So when
So
I
the-
read a Matthew Zapruder poem,
Yeah.
I become Matthew Zapruder for a short time.
Yes.
Yeah.
And instead of having a purpose, like the purpose is to do X, the purpose of the poem is to make you think like him, right? And he kind of goes, he talks about that a few times in the book, if I'm getting it correctly.
Yeah.
Which I think
to
is
see
cool.
his perspective.
Right. And so I was
Yeah.
gonna, if you don't mind,
Sure, go for
share
it.
a part of the book because I think it will clarify.
Although, wait a minute, I do mind, John. I gotta go. No, I'm just
Oh,
kidding.
well, that's all right. Okay, so here, and I'll read it. We'll put the text up on the screen. All right. Poems exist to create a space for the possibilities of language as material. That is what distinguishes them from all other forms of writing. Poems allow language its inherent provisionality, uncertainty, and slippages. They also give space for its physicality, the way it sounds, looks, feels in the mouth, to itself make meaning. And poems also remind us of something we almost always take for granted, the miraculous, tenuous ability of language to connect us to each other and the world around us. The elusive, quicksilver, provisional nature of language is by necessity suppressed in ordinary conversation as well in most other forms of writing. What makes a poem different from any other use of language is that it remains the sole place designed expressly to make available those connections that are hidden when language is being used for another purpose. Language waits to be released in poetry. Poetry enacts the possibilities and powers that lie dormant in the nature of language itself. Poems are where contradictions and possibilities of the material of this meaning-making system are deliberately brought forth and celebrated, ultimately undistracted by any other overriding purpose. Okay, that was a lot.
Yeah, but that sounds like, to me, it sounds similar to like the Freudian iceberg, you know, that our unconscious is under the water and there's so much down there that we don't even realize. Similar to how he's talking about language, that there is so much meaning there that doesn't get a chance to get expressed in normal conversation or writing, as he said. Only poetry can do that.
Right. And, you know, like we both teach English and we teach poetry, and I teach AP English, and it's sometimes hard in AP in the test, and in you know, like it's easier in school to just say the purpose of this poem is to show that nature is blank.
Right.
But that's not really the purpose of the poem. Like the poet didn't necessarily do that. And he actually talks about that. There's a part where he says teachers often do it this way because the other way to do it is so messy.
Yeah.
Right? Like to really talk about what poetry does would be to open up a can of worms so large that you couldn't possibly deal with it. So it's easier to just kind of funnel it into something simple.
Concrete explication.
Right.
you know.
Which gives students a warped view. Oh, I'm just looking for the meaning.
Right. Where are the metaphors in this poem?
Right,
You know?
right. So I really think this is valuable because he does remind us of that.
Yeah.
Don't just, it's good sometimes to think like that, very analytically, but that's not the actual purpose of poetry,
Yeah.
he seems to be saying. So be careful.
Watch
Be
yourself.
careful. Don't simplify it. No, I've been enjoying it. I don't know if students would be able to handle it, like because it's very abstract and it's very complex and contradictory and all that stuff. But definitely worth a look if you are looking to think about poetry maybe in a different way.
Thanks for watching. Please join the conversation in the comments on YouTube or on Twitter at Trojan Poetry DGM. Also, check out our website at trojanpoetrydgn.blogspot.com.